guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. So, say goodbye to the preliminary hearing. There are 3 videos today, 2 that are about 50 minutes long, and then the last one's like 20 minutes long. I'm going to do all of them today, and then we'll be done with the preliminary hearing. You know what that means? That means next time I stream OJ, we start the trial. We start the whole trial. And we're going to keep plugging at it. We're going to get through this trial. I can't wait. So, let's get started. There they are. Hi, guys.
Along the wound path. Bleeding either at the margins or in the tissue spaces along the wound path.
Doctor,
I might say, incidentally, when I describe wounds or forensic pathologists describe wounds, we may say that we may describe injuries and specify where injuries appear to be post-mortem. I mean, that's characteristic. If we find a wound that appears to be inflicted post-mortem, we would specifically state that. And contrary to that, when we see vital activity, we generally describe bleeding in the wound or in the wound path or in the tissue spaces along the wound to substantiate that they occurred during life.
Dr. Golden, with regard to the figure in the lower left-hand portion of the diagram marked as People's 25 for identification, does that figure indicate some sort of wound or trauma to the right side of Nicole Brown Simpson's head?
I don't remember this,
We're
lawyer.
referring to the red marking here, yes.
And what did you find
Have we seen this lawyer before? Has he come up?
in the course of your autopsy that indicated such a wound or trauma?
Well, I'm referring to my report to refresh memory, but there was a bruise on the right side of the scalp, 4 inches directly above the ear canal. And after a shaving of the scalp, it was 1 by 1 inch. It was a fresh bruise. It was red-violet in color. No other injury was apparent, meaning no abrasion or laceration. And this bruise, on subsequent examination, disclosed bruising beneath the scalp. Correction on that, fresh bruising beneath the scalp.
Would that indicate to you, sir, that this was an antemortem wound?
Yes, this was an antemortem wound. It was associated with a deep scalp bruise.
Inflicted, consequently, while Nicole Brown Simpson was still alive, is that correct?
Yes.
And inferentially, before she receives the gaping incised wound across the neck, is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have another diagram that I would like to have marked. It pertains to the autopsy of Nicole Brown Simpson. It reflects 3 wounds to the scalp. May this be People's 26 for identification?
Yes.
Dr. Golden, during the course of your autopsy upon the body of Nicole Brown Simpson, did you observe wounds or trauma to the scalp of Nicole?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us what you observed, sir.
There was a cutting wound on the back of the scalp, left side, which, and I'm referring to my report, particularly the addendum report on Nicole Brown Simpson, It's a 1¼ inch length, diagonally oriented cutting wound, tapered above, and this doesn't reflect it as well. The diagram doesn't reflect the actual appearance as the photograph would, but it's a 1¼ inch long cutting wound. It was longer than deep. It went into the scalp for approximately 3/8 to 1/2 inch and did no further damage to the skull.
This was not a fatal wound, I take it?
No.
Was it an antemortem wound, that is, one that was inflicted before Nicole Brown Simpson died?
Yes, this wound was associated with fresh scalp hemorrhage. In other words, bleeding in the deep scalp tissues.
Now, Dr. Golden, there were 2 other wounds that you observed with regard to Nicole Brown Simpson's scalp, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a cutting wound or stab wound superficially right in the posterior parietal occipital, in other words, lower down here on the right side of the lower scalp. This was a 1/2 inch in length superficial wound, only going in, again, 3/8 to 1/2 inch, a non-fatal wound.
Was it also...
There was a small amount of hemorrhage associated. Again, that occurred before death. It was an antemortem injury.
Okay, thank you, doctor. And just for purposes of the record, you were indicating a wound roughly in the center of the head, midway between the ears on People's 26 for identification.
Yes.
Doctor, there was a 3rd wound. Would you briefly describe that wound for us and indicate whether or not it was antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem?
That was an antemortem cutting wound, 3/16 of an inch in length, involving the skin only, with a small amount of deep scalp hemorrhage. Again, it's antemortem. It was a superficial cutting wound of the scalp.
And you're indicating on the diagram, People's 26 for identification, a wound closest to the left ear as depicted on the diagram. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, doctor, during the course of your autopsy as performed upon Nicole Brown Simpson's body, did you notice any injuries to her hands?
Yes.
Tell us about that, sir.
Well, okay, referring to my notes, my autopsy notes and protocol to refresh my memory. On the index finger on the right index finger, there was a 5/8 inch long cut of the skin adjacent to the distal knuckle. Involved the skin only, and it had was a tangential cut, which would indicate that it was shelved. In other words, it didn't go in straight. It was an oblique cut, which would indicate shelving or a tangential cut.
And so what is the distal knuckle?
The one closest to the fingertip. Proximal, distal. Proximal is closer to the... Proximal would be closer to the hand, and...
Is he annoyed that we don't know this? Is this doctor just annoyed at everybody because we don't know these words?
Distal would be closer to the fingertip.
I see. Okay. Would you briefly describe the other wounds to Nicole Brown Simpson's hands that you observed?
A few minor injuries. Punctate abrasion on the ring finger of the right hand. On the left hand, there was a punctate abrasion, base of the right ring finger. And finally, there was a 1/2 inch superficial skin cut on the top of the left hand.
Dr. Golden, are you familiar with the term defense wounds?
Yes.
What are defense wounds, sir?
Defense wounds.
Guys, feeling attacked by this guy because he's so annoyed that he has to answer questions.
Are injuries on the upper extremities, either the arms or the hands, which would occur when the victim raises.
Yeah, maybe, Anthony, if you've ever heard that word before. But why would you use a case statement instead of an if else? If you don't hear these words, you don't know what they mean. To me, case statement and if else are just easy to understand, but nobody knows what they are unless they write computer code. I don't know any of those words because I've never done anything on. I've never done medical work on someone before. I pretended, but that's different.
The extremities to protect the body or to ward off or grab the instrument or to ward off or fend off the blow by an assailant.
Sir, in your opinion, were any of the wounds to Nicole Brown Simpson's hands compatible with defense wounds?
Yes.
And why is that, sir?
The cut on the right index finger is in a characteristic location for a defense wound on the palmar or volar surface of the finger, which could indicate an attempt to fend off the weapon or to grab the weapon, and the superficial cutting wound on the top of the hand that I described could also be construed as a defense wound. It's a superficial cut, but could also indicate a defensive motion to attempt to ward off I don't want to say blow, to ward off the weapon that was inflicting the injuries.
Dr. Golden, at the conclusion of the autopsy that you performed upon Nicole Brown Simpson's body, did you form an opinion as to the cause of her death?
Yes.
What was your opinion, sir?
She died as a result of the sharp force injuries, which includes the cutting wound and the stab wound. So they're grouped as sharp force injuries.
And that would include the wounds most specifically depicted and as characterized by your testimony in People's 25 for identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Golden, later in the morning, on June 14th, 1994, you performed an autopsy upon the body of an individual identified to you as Ronald Goldman. Is that correct?
Yes.
And prior to performing the autopsy procedures, did you examine the body
You don't know how grumpy I get when I miss my golf game for court.
and determine that it was clothed?
Yes.
And would you describe how Mr. Goldman's body was clothed when you first observed him?
Okay. I'll also refer to my autopsy protocol, but he was wearing a long sleeve type of shirt or sweater that was extensively bloodstained and moist at the time that I examined it. And he was also wearing a pair of bloodstained Levi jeans and 2 canvas type boots and 2 sweat socks.
Sir, with regard to the shirt, did you examine it for any
I was
evidence
grumpy
of
yesterday.
cuts or slits or tears?
Yes, I did.
What did you find?
On the front or lower right side, there was a 1.5 inch long slit-like tear. Lower right sleeve, a 1 inch slit-like tear. On the back,
Mendez brothers.
lower side of the back, there is a 1/2 inch slit-like tear.
sir, with regard to Mr. Goldman's jeans, did you find any evidence of a slit, tear, or cut in that item of clothes?
Yes, on the jeans, on the outside of the left hip region, there was a 1.5-inch long slit.
And Dr. Goldman, as part of your autopsy procedure, was the clothing removed from Mr. Goldman's body and preserved?
Yes.
After the clothing was removed, Dr. Goldman, did you determine the length of Mr. Goldman's body?
Yes.
And what was that, sir?
69 inches or 5 feet 9 inches.
And Dr. Goldman, did you also determine the weight of Mr. Goldman's body?
Yes, 171 pounds.
Doctor, did you observe injury to the neck area of Ronald Goldman?
Yes.
And starting with the front of the neck, did you observe any evidence of injury to the front of the neck?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have here a diagram pertaining to Ronald Goldman's autopsy. It reflects wounds to the front of the neck as well as to the right side of the face and as to the left side of the neck. May that be People's 27 for identification?
He looks bored and sleepy. Heavy eyelids.
Dr. Goldman, People's 27 for identification is a diagram that you prepared in the course of the autopsy you performed upon Ronald Goldman's body. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And during the course of that autopsy, did you observe what appeared to be two parallel incised wounds on the front of Mr. Goldman's neck?
Yes, I did.
Would you describe those in more detail for us, sir, and make reference to the diagram People's 27 for identification as you do so?
Okay, I'll also use the autopsy report and the addendum report. Basically, at the there was a transverse superficial cutting wound at the level of the superior border of the larynx, or voice box, 3 inches in length, and it on the left side it went within 1/2 inch of the of another injury of the left side of the neck to be described later, and it went transversely across the front of the neck to the right side to the right anterior side of the neck.
How deep was that particular wound, Dr. Goldman?
It was deeper on the left, where it went down through the skin and dermis to the fascia, the connective tissue beneath the dermis and overlying the muscle. It became more superficial on the right.
Was that a deep wound?
I've already described it, Steph. It went down to the fascia on the left and tapered to the skin on the right. It was not a fatal wound.
That's hilarious.
And what are the fascia?
Fascia is the connective tissue, the flat sheets of connective tissue beneath in the tissue planes. Here would be the covering, the superficial fascia overlying the muscles of the neck.
And doctor, this particular incised wound was not fatal in and of itself. Is that correct?
No, it was not.
Was it inflicted ante-mortem, that is, before fatal wounds were inflicted upon Mr. Goldman?
Yeah.
Again, just for the sake of the record, and I hate to bring this up, from where I'm sitting, it appears that the doctor from time to time at least refreshes his memory.
I think many times he has told us. It looks like you are looking at your report again to answer the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there was a small amount of tissue hemorrhage associated with that wound.
And with regard to your indications to the diagram here, you are referring to the upper leftmost figure on People's 27 for identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, doctor, during the course of your autopsy, did you also observe a second incised wound below the larynx and parallel to the one you've just described?
Yes.
Describe that for us, please.
That was below the
Wow.
first wound, referring to my notes. It was horizontally oriented. It was parallel to the first wound, 6 inches in length, starting on the left side of the neck. It was superficial, excuse me, involving the skin only, and it went around to the right side of the neck.
Did it angulate
It
upwards?
then it went to the right side of the neck, and although it's not shown here, it then angulated upward towards another wound on the right side of the neck, to be described below.
Was this wound fatal in and of
So
itself?
this wound was superficial, and I've indicated it involves
We never kick dogs, Brad, ever. No matter what their names are.
it involved the skin. It involves the skin only. It was a superficial cutting wound.
And how would you characterize this wound in terms of being antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem?
I believed it to be antemortem, inasmuch as there was a small amount of visible dermal, meaning skin hemorrhage, when I first saw it.
Now, doctor, referring to the lower right-hand figure on People's 27 for identification, does that particular figure depict some evidence of injury to the left side of Mr. Goldman's neck and head that you observed during the course of your autopsy?
Yes, it does.
Now, using your pointer, sir, and taking the lowermost wound, would you describe what you found with regard to that wound when you conducted your autopsy upon Mr. Goldman's body?
Well, there was a large gaping sharp force injury on the left side of the neck, 3 inches in length, which I'm pointing to right here.
Indicating the lowermost apparent sharp force wound in red on the diagram. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, would you tell us something about the wound path of that particular wound?
Okay. And of course, I'm refreshing my memory. It was on the left side of the neck, began at the level of the mid-larynx, cut through the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and it went through the skin and the muscle with bleeding along the path, and basically it severed the left internal jugular vein. There was extensive bleeding in the adjacent tissue, and I determined that to be the pathway of that wound.
Did that wound transect or sever any major blood vessels?
Yes, as I stated, it transected the left internal jugular vein.
Now, there was a second wound to the left side of Mr.
Just a
Goldman's
pop.
head. Is that correct?
Yes.
Describe that for us, please, in brief.
The second
Where's
wound
Dad?
was above
Dad's
it,
gone.
behind the left ear. There's a gaping wound, 2 inches in length. The lower borders were irregular or ragged, and as I mentioned, it was 2 inches in length. Along the tissue planes, it appeared to be separated from the lower one by approximate distance of 4 inches. So those two wounds shared common areas of injury.
Are you saying that the two wound paths intersected with regard to those two wounds?
Yes, they met, they met deep along the tissue planes. So basically, you say they communicated or they shared common areas of injury.
Taking those two wounds together, doctor, are they fatal wounds? Either one or both or together? Also taking into consideration that the jugular vein on that side was severed?
Well, either or together, it's a fatal injury because of the severing of the left internal jugular vein.
And doctor, with regard to those two wounds, were they antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem?
No, as I've described, there was extensive hemorrhage along the wound path and in the tissue spaces.
Now, doctor, I realize that there are more lesser wounds that were not indicated on your diagram, but I would like to move ahead now to the lower left-hand
I wouldn't even get a delay from work for 1 foot.
figure on people's 27 for identification. And, sir, you observed during the course of your autopsy 5 wounds to the right side of Mr. Goldman's face. Is that correct?
Yes?
And it appears that we have 4 of those 5 wounds marked in red on that lower left-hand figure on people's 27 for identification. Is that correct?
Yes?
Now, would you, in brief, describe those wounds for us, sir?
Okay, and referring to my notes, these were superficial cuts, varying in orientation, involving the skin of the right cheek, and they varied from approximately 1/2 to 1 inch in maximal length.
And these 5 wounds, sir, were non-fatal. Is that correct? In and of themselves?
No, correction, actually, yes, I said 1/2 twice, it's, referring to my protocol. They were small cuts. They varied from 1/4 inch in length to 5/8 of an inch in length.
Hi, Kiki.
These
All to-
superficial cuts on the right side of the cheek.
All to the right side of the cheek, is that correct?
Yes.
And were all of those antemortem wounds, as far as you can determine?
Yes, they were.
Now, doctor, during the course of your autopsy, you observed injury to the right side of Mr. Goldman's neck, did you not?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have another diagram pertaining to Mr. Goldman's autopsy. It depicts wounds to the right side of the neck. May that be People's Next in Order 28.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Golden, with regard to the lower left-hand figure depicted on People's 28 for identification,
Yes.
you observed some wounds in that area of Mr. Goldman's body, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Would you describe those wounds for us, please?
Right, and referring to the report and the addendum, on the right side of the neck, 3 inches below the...
It really wouldn't cost you an arm and a leg because you wouldn't get one because you couldn't afford it.
external auditory canal, there was a stab wound, 5/8 of an inch in length, and one end was pointed, the other end was Y-shaped or forked, and basically the wound path was through the skin, subcutaneous tissue, did not strike a major artery or vein. And this wound connected or shared common area of injury with another wound on the right side of the neck above it, which was below and behind the right ear, behind the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and that was a 2-inch long wound with a 1-inch long superficial cut of the skin above it. And as you indicate here, the wound that I've just described,
A simple cup of
the
coffee.
deeper wound, intersected the superficial cut of the front of the neck, which we described earlier, which went around to the right side and then angled upward, and intersected that wound. So that's why it has that peculiar configuration there.
And sir, when you're referring to that superficial incised wound, that was on a previous diagram what appeared to be a superficial incised cut which moved across above the larynx and then intersected with this wound as depicted on People's 28. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Dr. Golden, with regard to these wounds that you just described in your testimony, were these wounds fatal in and of themselves?
All that I've described on the right side of the neck were not fatal, as I've described earlier. No major artery or vein was cut or incised, and that includes the jugular and the common carotid artery.
Dr. Golden, although not depicted on this particular diagram, did you observe abrasions to the right side of Mr. Goldman's face?
Yes.
And in brief, describe what you observed with regard to the pattern of abrasions that you observed.
Well, these are not depicted, so I'll have to refer to my notes, particularly on the addendum. There are multiple abrasions or scrapes on the right side of the face, extending from the basically extending from the temporal region down to the right cheek, and from the going as far forward as the lower eyelid and back to the front of the ear. Basically, the area covered was 4.5 by 2.5 inches, and they were linear, some diagonally oriented, some vertically. The area that they covered, namely the abrasions, also circumscribed the area of the superficial cutting wounds of the right cheek that I described earlier.
Those are the 5 cutting wounds you testified to?
Yes. So I had two things visible there: the multiple abrasions on the cheek, and then the circumscribed area which contained the cutting wounds, the superficial cutting wounds.
Drunken Smurf, I was just going into my DMs to make sure you were okay. I was just about to send you a DM. Hey, how are ya?
And sir, with reference to the diagram People's 28 for identification, you're indicating an area on the figure in the lower left-hand side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with regard to those abrasions, would you characterize those abrasions as antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem?
I would not characterize them as postmortem. They appeared to be perimortem, based on their color.
And again, perimortem meaning?
At about the time of death, which could be shortly before, at the time of, or shortly thereafter.
Now, doctor, during the course of your autopsy, you
Dungeon Siege. Is it Dungeon
observed
Siege?
a number of various small incised wounds to the right and left ears of Mr. Goldman. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you also observe injuries to the scalp of Ronald Golden?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have another diagram pertaining to Mr. Golden's autopsy. May that be Peoples 29 for identification?
Yes.
Farmtown.
Dr. Golden, with
I just downloaded a One Piece game today. Haven't played it yet. See how it is.
reference to Peoples 29 for identification, does that diagram, particularly the figure in the lower right-hand corner, depict the approximate locations of scalp wounds you observed on Mr. Goldman's head during the course of your autopsy?
Yes, it does.
Were each of those wounds non-fatal?
Yes, that's correct.
And did they all appear to be antemortem in nature?
Yes, they did.
And with regard to the dimensions of the wounds, no, I'll withdraw that. Now, Dr. Golden, during the course of your autopsy, you also observed what appeared to be stab wounds to the torso of Mr. Goldman's body. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have here another diagram depicting apparent stab wounds to the right side of the torso and the left thigh. May that be Peoples 30 for identification.
Yes.
Dr. Golden, with reference to Peoples 30 for identification and the figure which appears at the left-hand side of the diagram, are there depicted the approximate locations of three stab or cutting wounds that you observed on Mr. Goldman's body during the autopsy that you performed?
Yes.
And again, these wounds are numbered for reference purposes only and do not necessarily mean the order in which they were inflicted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Dr. Golden, starting with wound number 1, as indicated on Peoples 30 for identification, would you describe that wound for us, please?
That depicts a stab wound on the right side of the chest. Excuse me. Did you want a description of each wound, or just what they are?
I would like a description of each wound, starting with the wound that you have numbered as number 1.
All right. That was a stab wound on the right side of the chest, 5/8 of an inch in length, with a rounded or blunt end on the lower end, and this wound went into the chest through the right 7th rib into the chest cavity. There was approximately 100-200 ml of blood in the chest cavity, and further dissection disclosed that the wound perforated the.
I hate pausing OJ for this, but tell me which of these two comments actually win. Okay, guys? Tell me which actually win. Which actually means, happy birthday. Who is way more excited? Ready? That's the first one. I win.
The right lung, and continued forward and terminated, or the wound path terminated on the front of the rib cage, where I found a 3/4 inch cut on the posterior aspect or back of the right 4th rib. So after estimating the total length of the wound path was 4 inches.
Doctor, when you say ml, you're referring to milliliters, are you not?
Yes.
Excitement.
Was the length of this particular wound approximately 5/8 of an inch?
The measurement on the skin was 5/8 of an inch, yes.
And in your opinion, sir, was this wound consistent with having been inflicted by a single-edged knife?
Yes, this one had the configuration of a single-edged blade. It had the wound had a blunt or squared off end and a pointed or tapered end.
Was this a fatal wound, doctor?
This wound perforated the lung and caused hemorrhage into the right chest cavity, and is considered a fatal wound. It should also be noted there was another stab wound also into the right side of the chest, which also injured the lung.
We're going to talk about that second stab wound in just a second, doctor. It's just one more question with regard to stab wound number 1. Was that an antemortem wound, in your opinion?
Yes, it was.
Now, doctor, with reference to the stab wound that you have numbered as stab wound number 2 on the right side of Mr. Goldman's body, would you describe that wound for us, please?
That was on the right side of the chest. Actually close to stab wound number 1. And this wound measured 1.5 inches in length on the skin, diagonally oriented. This also had the characteristic of a dull or blunt end and a pointed or a tapered end, which again is consistent with a single-edged blade. And this wound also penetrated the chest through the rib cage, and this wound path was close to the wound path of stab wound number 1, with bleeding along the wound path, and it also went through the lower part of the right lung, creating a perforating injury. And again, there was hemorrhage along the wound path and the blood in the pleural cavity.
Indicating that this was a wound inflicted while Mr. Goldman was alive, isn't that right?
Yes.
Was this wound fatal?
Yes, because of the perforation of the lung and the associated hemothorax.
Now, doctor, there's a third wound that is depicted on the figure, the left-hand side of people's 30 for identification. That was a stab wound to the right flank, was it not?
Yes.
And that had a length of approximately 3/8 inches and a depth of penetration only into the skin and underlying tissue, is that correct?
Yes, that was a superficial wound. It did not penetrate the chest or abdomen.
Was it an antemortem wound, in your opinion?
Yes.
Doctor, with regard to the figure at the right side of the diagram marked People's 30 for identification, there appears to be a wound to the left thigh indicated on the diagram. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you detect and observe such a wound upon the body of Ronald Goldman when you performed the autopsy?
Yes.
And would you describe that wound, please?
This was a stab wound of the lateral outside aspect of the left thigh, 2 1/8 inches in length, and there was a blunt or dull end seen, 1/32 of an inch, and the wound path was through the skin into the muscle of the thigh with bleeding along the wound path. The depth of penetration was approximately 3-3.5 inches.
Meaning 3 to 3.5 inches?
Yes.
And from your testimony, sir, I would infer that this was a wound that you would characterize as antemortem. Is that correct?
Yes, there was bleeding along the the wound path and the tissue spaces, yes.
With regard to what you observed in connection with this particular wound, would you characterize this wound as one consistent with having been inflicted by a single-edged knife?
Now, this wound did have the characteristic rounded or dull end that would be characteristic of a single-edged blade. Yes, it would.
Doctor, during the course of the autopsy involving Mr. Goldman's body, you detected a wound to the left side abdomen of Mr. Goldman, did you not?
Yes?
And, Your Honor, I have here...
Can someone please tell me how to say "I'm so sorry" in French?
one last diagram depicting the described wound to the left side abdomen of Mr. Goldman. May this be 31 for identification?
Yes.
Doctor, with reference to the wound as depicted on the rightmost figure on this diagram of People's 31 for identification, would you describe that wound for us, please?
Je suis tellement désolé. Je suis tellement désolé.
Okay, and I'm referring to my report to refresh my recollection. It was a stab wound of the left flank, below the rib cage.
Sorry, Charlotte, I
And it
tried.
was 3/4 of an inch in length. And, this wound did not have a blunt or squared off end. It was, one end was pointed or tapered, the opposite end was forked or split. And then going through this wound penetrated into the body wall and passed through the muscle, the iliopsoas muscle, with bleeding along the way, and then going from back to front, the wound path ended in the abdominal aorta, where two perforating stab wounds were evident. So the wound terminated in the abdominal aorta with two perforating wounds.
In other words, the abdominal aorta was perforated, is that correct?
Yes.
What was the apparent depth of the wound?
Measured from the outside of the body wall to the termination in the aorta was approximately 5.5 inches.
Was this wound fatal in and of itself?
Yes, this perforated the aorta. There was hemorrhage along the wound path, and there was bleeding inside the body cavity, the peritoneal cavity.
I was distracted. Did he say how long it took for these wounds, once you perforate an artery, how long it takes for death?
Doctor, not depicted on any diagram identified thus far.
Thank you, Jen. Thank
Was
you.
there a stab wound to the upper right chest over the right clavicle? Do you recall that one?
Yes, yes. It's not on this diagram. It's in my report.
And that was a
This
superficial
is
wound.
a superficially oriented wound, 1/2 inch in length, involving the skin and subcutaneous tissue. Again, it was split or forked on one end, pointed or tapered on the other end, with a small amount of hemorrhage. Again, cannot tell from this wound whether it was caused by a single or double-edged
You
blade.
were able to determine, were you not, that this was an antemortem wound?
Yes, there was a small amount of fresh bleeding associated, so it was an antemortem wound.
Dr. Golden, earlier in your testimony today, you have described for us what are known as defense wounds. Did you see any indicia of defense wounds on Mr. Goldman's body?
Yes.
In general, would you describe what you observed in that regard?
He had cutting wounds on the right hand and on the left hand. And specifically, there were cutting wounds on the palm of the right hand, at the base of the index finger, palmar surface of the right hand, at the web of the thumb, palmar surface of the right hand, near the web of the thumb, palmar surface of the left hand, at the web of the thumb, and on the addendum report, specifically on the palmar surface of the left hand, there was a superficial cutting wound. So I believe that characterizes the main sharp force or cutting injuries
Your
on
Honor,
his hands.
I have here two photographs.
Doesn't taste any different. It's just
People's
coloring.
29 for identification with the
Delicious.
court's permission depicts the...
I'm sorry, People's 29?
I'm sorry,
We're up to
32.
31.
Yes. And that, the photograph bears a coroner's tag and appears to depict the right palm of the decedent. And then People's 33 for identification, Your Honor. Similar photograph depicting what appears to be the left palm of the decedent, Ronald Goldman. It too also bears a coroner's evidence tag, which corresponds to the case number assigned to Mr. Goldman's autopsy. May these be so marked by
Yes.
identification? Dr. Goldman, I'm going to hand you first People's 32 for identification and ask that you observe that in discrete fashion. Sir, does that photograph depict the sharper incised wounds that you've described in your testimony as defense wounds to the right palm of Mr. Goldman's hand?
Yes?
Was that a photo taken during Mr. Goldman's autopsy?
Yes?
With regard to People's 33 for identification, would you tell us what that depicts, sir? That is the photograph that is now face down on the witness stand before you. What does that photograph depict, sir?
That is the left hand of the decedent, palmar surface.
Does that photograph
The river in
truly and
Chicago.
accurately depict the defense wounds to the left palm of Mr. Goldman's hands that you've described thus far in your testimony?
Yes?
Dr. Golden, in addition to the wounds depicted in People's 32 and 33 for identification, did you observe what might be characterized as other defense wounds to the back of Mr. Goldman's hands as well as to his forearms?
Yes.
And in general and in brief, how would you characterize those wounds?
Basically, there are multiple abrasions involving the forearm, including the outer or lateral aspect of the forearm where there are multiple abrasions. That means scratches. Some were not scratches. They were irregular in configuration. On the top of the hand, there were fresh bruises, abrasions on the knuckles, and I went into detail on which fingers and which knuckles there are abrasions, bruises on the various knuckles and fingers on
All the time.
of the right hand. On the
All of
top
them.
or dorsal surface of the left hand, there were
Infinity.
multiple red-brown
Not a
abrasions
number.
involving the knuckles of the index finger, and then there were also multiple irregularly configured abrasions on the knuckle of the middle finger. There was also a fresh bruise about 1 1/4 by 1 1/2 inches on the top of the left hand, adjacent to the wrist. And fresh bruises on the ulnar surface of the left wrist, which means on the, I guess you'd say, the inner surface of the left wrist. And on the addendum report, there were
Only when I'm working.
a few additional abrasions on the fingers, the fingers of the left hand, middle finger, left hand, fifth finger, and on the distal portion of the left thumb. So basically, there were a number of abrasions and bruises, many on the top or knuckles of the fingers and on top of the hand.
All compatible with defense wounds, in your opinion?
Well,
There's only one person unmuted, and I can't say who she is. I can. You might be able to guess. I'm too scared to mute her.
yes, or arising during a struggle.
Dr. Golden, at the conclusion of your autopsy, did you form an opinion as to the cause of Ronald Goldman's death?
Yes.
And what was your opinion?
He died as a result of the multiple sharp injuries, which included the cutting wound of the left side of the neck, which severed or transected the left internal jugular vein, and the 2 stab wounds of the right side of the chest, which perforated the thorax and right lung, and the stab wound of the left side of the abdomen, which perforated the abdominal aorta.
A few more questions, sir, if I may.
Yes.
Dr. Golden, during each of these autopsies, were the investigating officers from the Los Angeles Police Department present?
Yes.
And by that I mean specifically, were Detectives Phil Van Adder and Tom Lang present during each of the autopsies?
Yes.
Sir, with regard to the autopsy performed on Nicole Brown Simpson's body, did you take a blood sample for purposes of serological study?
Yes.
And was that particular blood sample placed in a test tube bearing Nicole Brown Simpson's name and the applicable coroner's case number?
Yes.
Was the same procedure followed with regard to the taking of a blood sample from Ronald Goldman's body?
Yes.
And were those blood samples later delivered into the custody of Detective Van Adder?
Yes.
Dr. Golden, on June the 15th, 1994, were you visited at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office by Detective Phil Van Adder?
Yes.
On that date, sir, did Detective Van Adder show you a knife?
Yes.
Describe what you recall about the knife that was shown to you by Detective Van Adder.
It was a folding knife with a blade approximately 6 inches long.
And describe what happened when Detective Van Adder showed you that knife.
Well, he wanted to know if that knife was consistent or compatible with the wounds that I saw inflicted on either individual, and whether it was compatible with some of the wounds inflicted on either individual.
And did you provide Detective Van Adder with an answer?
I said it could. Yes, I did.
And what was your answer?
I said it could have been the weapon. Yes, that inflicted some of the wounds.
Now, you examined the knife, is that correct?
Cursorily, yes. I measured the length of and the width of the blade.
Now, is your opinion that a knife such as that could have inflicted the wounds received by Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman definitive, or would you have liked to have done something more with regard to examination of the knife to determine more precisely?
It was not definitive. I'd like to do a lot more.
Hello, Mrs.
Like what?
Bendover.
Well, make detailed measurements of the blade, correlating each wound that I described, specifically each stab wound that I described in my protocol with the measurements of the blade of the instrument.
To date, sir, have you had the opportunity to conduct such an examination?
No, I haven't.
So your opinion then is with regard to the knife displayed to you by Detective Van Ander that it could have inflicted the wounds upon Mr. Goldman's body and upon Nicole Brown Simpson's body, but not necessarily so. Is that correct?
This doctor, I betcha he has some real zingers. I betcha his personality is as dry and aloof as he looks in real life. But I bet you, like, when he's at dinner with friends or anything, he's quiet, sitting there quiet the whole time, speaking only, facts about life, all they're talking about. But then every once in a while, he'll slip in a zinger with that face right there, which makes it 1,000 times more funny. I bet you he has some funny jokes. I would like to have dinner with him.
Not necessarily so. To be scientific, I would have to get my little white ruler out that I use for measuring the wounds on the body and do the same thing on the knife.
Okay. May I have a moment, John?
Yes.
No further questions.
It's about 5 minutes to 12. Which of you is going to cross-examine the witness? Okay. I think we'll break at this point. We'll start with your cross-examination at 1:30. I would like to see counsel briefly in chambers.
I'm so sorry you have to go to work. Work sucks. I know.
Come to order. Court is once again in session.
Oh, we're getting so close to the trial. We're getting so close. 50-minute video,
We're once
20-minute
again in
video.
the case of People versus Simpson. The defendant is present with counsel. The people are represented. Dr. Golden's on the witness stand. I remind you, sir, that you remain under oath. Mr. Shapiro.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Doctor, I was presented this morning with a 3/4 page form that indicates curriculum vitae, and it's dated May 5th of '94. Is this your current resume?
Yes?
Yes, this is Kathleen, right? Kathleen Powell something? Not Ito.
And is it up to date?
I believe so.
I notice in here that it indicates a space for current academic appointments, and it's blank. During your tenure, have you had any academic appointments?
I'm glad you made it now,
No.
David.
And it indicates in here current medical staff appointments, and it's blank. During your tenure, have you had any medical staff appointments?
No.
Then the next thing that's listed is the concise summary of your role in the forensic pathology program, and it lists 3 things: that you perform autopsies, courtroom testimony, and lecture. Does that cover the gamut of the summary of your role as a forensic pathologist?
Trying to think if there's anything I've omitted. Basically so, yes, unless there's some things I haven't recollected. It's basically I'm a deputy medical examiner and forensic pathologist. I don't have any medical school faculty appointments.
Because there was some talk before about you being a physician. Have you ever practiced medicine?
Yes.
Now, it indicates you're a lecturer. What type of lectures do you
Okay, that yes didn't sound very yes to me, did it, guys?
give, and to whom?
That would be intramural lectures at the Department of Coroner.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That would be intramural or interdepartmental lectures at the Department of Coroner.
So you talk to your colleagues?
That would be, yes.
And courtroom testimony, you told us, I believe, that you've testified approximately 700 times?
Approximately, yes.
And how many of those 700 times have you been called as a witness for the prosecution?
Many times, hundreds of times.
How many of those times have you been called as a witness for the defense?
I don't have the tally. In civil cases, I could be called by either the plaintiff or the defendant, so I wouldn't know. I have testified in civil cases, but in those instances, I'm not sure whether it's been the plaintiff or the defendant. In most of the criminal criminal cases, the prosecution calls me as a witness, but not invariably, because I won't say frequently, but occasionally the defense counsel wants us called as a witness rather than accepting a stipulation.
Have you testified in any other state as an expert witness other than California?
Not as a friend, no, I have not.
And have you testified in any other city, or any other county other than Los Angeles County as a forensic pathologist, as an expert?
Well, as the medical examiner, some of my cases have been in other counties. I'm sure about San Bernardino County. I have been in Santa Barbara County. I have been called as a witness in Santa Barbara County, but it pertains to a Department of Coroner case. But it was a civil case, and either the plaintiff or the defendant called me, but the reason I went there was not as a consultant, because the decedent came under our jurisdiction. But I did testify at a civil case in Santa Barbara County, criminal case in San Bernardino County, but I would be available in criminal cases in any county.
I don't know if I can get it. If I can, it's probably going to be about $100-200 to get it. But if I can get it, I'm going to do the Night Stalker next, if I can get it. I don't think I can get it, though. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker?
In California.
Now, also on your curriculum vitae, you have a title list, representative publications from the last 5 years. And you have included yourself as a co-author in 1989 of a 4-page magazine article dealing with pneumonia in infants. Is that the extent of your publications?
Yes?
Have you reviewed the general text in the field for determining time of death?
Excuse me, did you say text or texts?
Text.
I still don't... Singular.
Books.
Yes.
And what books have you relied upon in forming opinions as to the cause or as to the time of death?
I have read forensic pathology textbooks, and these would be the standard texts. Gradwell's Forensic Medicine, Spitz and Fisher's Medical Legal Investigation of Death, latest edition. Adelson, Pathology of Homicide. DeMayo's text on forensic pathology, and Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, and Knight's textbook on forensic pathology. And these are all standard references available to me at the Department of Coroner.
And in reviewing those sources, would you agree that the following factors are to be considered in determining time of death? First, rigor mortis.
Yes,
Second, lividity.
yes,
Third, temperature change.
yes,
Fourth, digestion in the stomach.
yes,
And fifth, eye fluids.
yes.
Anything else you'd like to add to that list?
Eyewitness.
Eyewitness. Okay. That'll be 6. Anything else?
No, I think that covers it.
And would you say that one of the important roles of your job as a deputy medical examiner is to ascertain the time of death in a homicide?
I would say to help determine a range of the time of death, yes.
And there are other people who you work with in forming those conclusions that are part of the coroner's office, is that correct?
Yes, that is.
And that would be a medical investigator
Yes,
and a deputy coroner?
yes.
Would there be other members of the team that you would rely on for that type of information?
No, the deputy coroner, the coroner investigator would be our eyes and ears in this matter.
And those people have also filed reports that you've included as part of what you've called the autopsy report or autopsy protocol, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you reviewed their findings prior to testifying today.
Yes.
In reviewing their findings, regarding Nicole Simpson, were you informed that she was found and pronounced dead by a member of the Los Angeles Fire Department Engine 19 squad?
Okay. I guess I can't find the relevant page in my protocol here. Yes, okay.
Take your
Yes,
time.
yes, LAFD Engine 19, pronounced by LAFD Engine 19.
And what was the time that the decedent, Miss Brown, was pronounced dead?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
All right.
Did you, first, I believe these are official records and part of the autopsy protocol, which he's indicated, and that if he has relied on these records in forming his opinion, he can testify to it. Second, hearsay is admissible at these proceedings.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah, but
Hodge.
maybe hear, Your Honor.
Yes.
First of all, the people have elicited no opinion with regard to time of death, nor do we intend to. We have an independent factual basis for that. So there's no foundational aspect to this. Second of all, it is complete hearsay. There's information in a report, and counsel has the burden of establishing this as an official record. And it is hearsay upon hearsay, and hence still inadmissible.
Your Honor, if the people are going to contend that a case report from the
I get that
county
every day.
coroner as part of the autopsy
Right now.
report is not the official record, we'll take the time to establish that foundation.
Well, at this point, it's hearsay, and the witness not being a peace officer, there is no exception to his being able to relate hearsay. So at this point, the objection is sustained.
You know who else gets stage fright? You're not going to believe it when I say it. The judge, he said it in one of his interviews. Um, I can't remember which interview. How, it's a little nervous before he gets on the bench. It's just a little nervous when you have to talk to other people. I never got nervous at all when I was about to sit down in front of my computer to write code. But before I go to a table, I have to go and talk to these people. I don't even know them. Definitely before I start my stream every single day. Got to breathe for a second.
In forming any conclusions or opinions in your case, did you at all consider the time the decedent, Nicole Simpson Brown, was pronounced dead?
Objection, Your Honor. No foundation in evidence thus far, and they get a bit ambiguous as to which conclusions and opinions that counsel is interested in.
Sustained.
You testified that it was part of your job to determine the time of death.
Objection, Your Honor. This states the evidence.
Is that part of your job? To determine the time of death?
Yes, only I would use the
Blink,
term
Marcia.
estimate
Blink.
or range of the time of death.
Half blink.
The objection's overruled.
And what factors did you use to estimate the time of death or range of time of death for the decedent, Ms. Brown?
Objection. This states the evidence. This witness has not made an estimate at the time of death.
Well, we haven't heard of an estimate as to time of death. So it assumes fact that's not in evidence yet.
Have you made an estimate in your official reports, or has anyone from the coroner's office made an estimate as to the time of death of the decedent, Mrs. Brown?
Objection caught down.
Sustained as to someone other than this witness.
I'm sorry?
It would be sustained as to whether someone other than this particular witness made such an estimate.
Did you make an estimate as to the time of death?
There's no official estimate in my report. There's nothing written down.
I'm asking you, have you made an estimate? Did anybody ask you, as the head person investigating this homicide, to make an estimate as to the time of death? Yes or no?
Objection. That misstates the evidence. He's not the head person investigating this homicide.
Well, I think we know what he means. Overruled. Has that been asked of you?
Yes?
Who asked that of you?
Well, my boss, Dr. Lakshmanan.
Did you give him an answer?
Yes?
What was your answer?
My answer was...
Are you referring to something?
No.
It looks like you're reading something to me. Maybe it'd be simpler that if you need to refer to something, if you could put that aside, and then if you need to refer to it, just ask us. Would that work for you?
Surely.
Okay. Would you kindly put that aside? Now, would you tell us what you told your boss, Dr. Lakshmanan, regarding your estimate of the time of death of Nicole Brown?
My estimate was based on the state of the gastric contents and the character of the gastric contents. It was somewhere 3 to 4 hours after her last meal.
That was the only factor you relied upon out of the 5 or 6 factors that you listed?
No, I haven't finished yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Then using that evidence, along with the body temperature determinations, which were taken approximately 11 hours after the body was discovered, I used formula graphs to reach a conclusion that the range of the time of death was somewhere between 10 and 15 hours prior to the time the investigator took the liver temperature determination.
So you used 2 of the 5 criteria. Is that correct?
And
Oh, you haven't finished yet.
and Then considering the rigor mortis determination, which at the time the investigator performed her determination, the body was in full rigor. Now I may pick up and look at page 1 of the coroner's protocol. The rigor mortis was fixed and was fully fixed. So that also placed the time of death somewhere beyond 9 to 12 hours. In other words, it was fully fixed at the time, which was probably known at the time of the pronouncement of death. And livor mortis was also fixed, and rigor mortis was fully established. So, four of the measurements or examinations were performed.
Let's go through each one of those, if we might. Regarding rigor mortis, what time does the case report that you've just referred to indicate that an observation for rigor mortis was first done by somebody from your department?
It was fully established. You know, the interesting thing is the air and liver temperature times are given, date and time. The livor and rigor mortis statements do not have an exact date and time listing, but it's taken at or about the time the liver temperature is taken.
Which is what time?
Well, on the Cole Brown Simpson, liver temperature was taken at 10:50 hours on 6/13/94.
Would you agree that the closer you take, the closer that you make the observations of the 4 indications you've talked, well, the 3, let's not talk about stomach content. The closer you make the 3 observations to the time of death, the better chance you will have of accurately establishing parameters for time of death?
Yes.
And would you say that it's proper procedure if a decedent was found at approximately 10 minutes after midnight to wait 10 and a half hours to perform these temperature evaluations?
Objection, Your Honor. They ambiguous as to what is proper procedure.
Do you understand the question, Doctor?
Yes.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and let you answer it.
The measurements are more accurate the closer to the actual time of death.
And are there people available from the coroner's office to make those measurements at the request of homicide detectives?
Yes.
Now, regarding the stomach contents, you say that was something important that you use as a criteria for establishing the estimated time of death of the decedent, Nicole Brown. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I take it those stomach contents are materials that can be preserved for later analysis. Is that correct?
Can be, yes.
And in fact, on the forms that you use, there's a checkbox for toxicological specimens collected. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Did you save the stomach contents?
No.
Were you able to determine who died first, the decedent Goldman or the decedent Brown?
No.
Do you have an opinion as to the time of death of Nicole Simpson?
I give you a range.
What is that range?
Somewhere between 9 o'clock and midnight.
Now, is there something in the report that indicates that one of your investigators had information from the mother of the decedent that she was alive at 11 p.m.?
Your Honor, I'm going to object now because counsel is attempting to elicit inadmissible and unreliable hearsay evidence.
I think it would be admissible only if the doctor relied upon it in formulating his opinion. And it would not be offered then for the truth of the matter, but for the fact that the doctor may have relied upon it. And I don't know whether he did or did not, and therefore until that foundation is established as to whether he relied upon that in forming his opinion, then the objection would be sustained.
Yes. And I understand the court's ruling that should it be permitted, it would be only for the limited purpose articulated by the court.
Correct.
Do you have any information from any investigator that's filed under a County of Los Angeles investigator's report for the Department of the Coroner regarding the last time somebody saw or spoke to Nicole Brown?
Yes?
What information did you have?
Am I allowed to testify on that? Or?
Your Honor, may I'm going to object for lack of foundation because there's no indication yet that this witness relied upon that information, whatever it may be.
Yes, Mr. Shapiro, I think that you need to establish that foundationally before I would allow that testimony to come in.
Thank you.
Which she just said
You
a minute
previously
ago.
testified that you read all these reports, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you read
Not
the-
not in exact detail. I did look at them. In fact, some of these reports were preliminary. May not have been fully prepared at the time I did the autopsy.
When was the report that's we're referring to that has in the upper left-hand corner number 3
Okay,
prepared?
the form number 3, prepared by investigator Radcliffe, was prepared at 6/13/94.
Was that before or after your autopsy?
6/13/94 should have been prepared before the autopsy.
Have you had enough time to prepare yourself to testify in this case today?
Yes?
You had enough time to review your reports?
Yes?
Do you think you would need some more time to prepare yourself adequately for testimony?
Your Honor, I object. That's argumentative.
Sustained.
Is it your testimony that you did or did not consider the investigator's report before you have testified here today in any area?
I did consider those parts of the investigator's report that I considered relevant to my testimony, and I've already testified about her her measurements that she took. That's the ones I've been asked about.
Is time of death relevant to your testimony?
Yes?
Didn't you just say that eyewitnesses are very important in establishing time of death?
Yes?
Would you consider a mother talking to her daughter as being an eyewitness to when somebody was last alive?
Well, I meant somebody actually witnessing the death. As often happens when death is pronounced in a hospital, we know the exact time of death.
What if somebody recorded the time of a telephone call? Would that be of any help to you?
Objection, Your Honor. That calls for speculation.
Overruled. Can you answer that? Are you able to answer them?
A telephone call to the decedent?
That is what you mean, isn't it,
Yes.
Mr. Shapiro? Yes.
Yes, that would be useful.
Is there anything that was done by anybody from the coroner's office to try to ascertain that?
Objection, I call for speculation.
Has the official reports you can look at?
Overruled. You can answer.
Yes?
What is it?
And, Your Honor, now I will object on the grounds that counsel is attempting to elicit hearsay. And hearsay of a potentially unreliable nature. There is an addendum to the report to which counsel is referring, which states, in part, that this following information summary is based on preliminary information and cannot be completely verified at the time of this report. In addition, what counsel is attempting to elicit does not fall within exception to the hearsay rule, even though contained in what may be characterized as an official record, you still have second-level hearsay. So on all those grounds, I object.
I still don't think, Mr. Shapiro, that you've established the foundation that the court felt needed to be established before that information could come in for the limited purpose for which the doctor considered it.
And she legitimately told you the exact words to say to the doctor, and you just didn't. Did you use this information to form any of your opinions? That's all you got to ask.
If he indeed considered it. I don't know whether he did. That's the foundation that has not been established.
Well, I believe,
And she
Your
just
Honor,
told
he
you
has
again.
testified that an eyewitness to, or somebody establishing the time the decedent was last known alive would be one of 6 factors he would consider in establishing time of death.
I understand that, but specifically in this case, there's been no testimony that he in fact did rely upon any statement from
You have to ask him.
someone indicating that they had had a telephone conversation with the decedent. And that's what you need to establish before I'll allow that testimony, and for a limited purpose only, not for the truth of the matter.
If you had some information as to the time the decedent was last talking to her mother, would that be of any benefit to you in coming to your estimate as to the time of death?
My estimates are based on the body measurements. I did not use any information about a telephone.
Good answer.
conversation.
Did you see any information about a telephone conversation when you came to your conclusions?
I heard about a telephone conversation and did see it in the report.
Who'd you hear about it from?
CBS News.
The initial report of the telephone conversation?
Yes.
I believe I heard it on the news or in the paper.
Is that before you saw it in your report?
Yes.
You mean the news had it on before it was in your investigator's report on the 13th?
I believe the news used the investigator's report, preliminary investigator's report.
Are you saying the news read the report before you did?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all.
My question now is...
All I'm saying is I did not use any telephone conversation to come to this time of death determination. I'm using body measurements and rigor mortis, livor mortis, cooling of the body, and gastric contents. That has nothing to do with a telephone conversation.
That's 10 and a half hours after the fact. And you would rather rely upon that than upon a mother's testimony that she talked, or a mother's comment that she had a telephone conversation with her daughter? You think
He's offended. He's offended that someone would suggest that he not use science and facts to come up with an answer
Which one do you think is more accurate?
Science and facts.
Among other things, sustained.
Okay, we'll go on to something. We'll go on to something else. Do you have an opinion, you observed the stomach contents of the decedent, Mr. Goldman, is that correct?
Yes,
Did you save those?
yes.
Why'd you save his and not save hers?
Well, first of all, I did not think it was indicated to save the contents on the Cole Brown Simpson. It was important to measure it, characterize it, describe it, and I did not think it was indicated to save it for toxicological examination. Of course, saving blood and other body fluids was very important for toxicological examination, which is what we did. The duty to characterize the gastric contents and measure it and describe what was in it was important, which is what I did. On Mr. Goldman, again, blood and other body fluids were preserved. On him, I was asked to save the gastric contents.
Who asked you to do that?
My chief supervisor, Dr. Lakshmanan.
Do you have an opinion as to, between Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, who was the last one to consume food?
I have no opinion on that, no.
Did you form
How would that
any
help anything?
conclusion or opinion as to whose food was more digested in the stomach?
Mr. Goldman's food was more digested than Nicole Brown Simpson's.
If he ate after she did, would that mean that he lived longer than she did?
If he had a meal after she had a meal,
Yes.
does this indicate that he lived longer than she did?
Yes.
He's repeating the question because it's so stupid that it's hard to understand.
Well, I don't know for sure. His state of the food being more digested in his stomach could indicate that he had the meal earlier, or that he had a lighter meal, and that digestion started sooner, whereas her food being in a less digested state. Particularly what I observed, a lot of the food appeared to be unchewed, particularly some of the particles of rigatoni were unchewed, and that could indicate that the unchewed food could remain in the stomach for a longer period of time before digestion.
Regarding the knife wounds, is it your findings that there were two types of knife wounds on both victims?
There are two morphologically different types of stab wounds on the victims. Namely, some of the stab wounds on the victims are indicative of a single-edged blade, for the reasons that I indicated, they have both a round or blunt end and a pointed end. And some of the wounds have a characteristically double pointed or forked end, which would indicate that they could be made by either a blunt end instrument or knife or a double sharp end instrument. In other words, a two-edged knife or a single-edged knife. And there's no way that my determinations can tell the difference between those. So there are two morphologically different types.
Could two knives have produced the injuries on both of the victims?
Yes.
Was there any evidence of any sexual attack on the decedent, Nicole Brown?
No, there wasn't.
Did you look for any semen, saliva, hairs, bloods that might be left behind on the victim of a sexual attack?
Okay, that would be performed by a criminalist to collect and preserve that evidence, and I wouldn't do it, and it's my understanding that it was not requested or performed.
Was there any attempt made to look for semen in Nicole or Mr. Goldman at the scene or at the autopsy?
Not to my knowledge.
Is it proper, in your opinion, to do a rape kit analysis on young women murder victims as a general rule?
The circumstances would dictate whether that procedure would be performed, and the investigators are the ones who would initiate that request.
Detective Van Adder brought you a knife to examine.
Yes, he did.
When was that?
Wednesday, so that would be Wednesday, June 15th.
Was he alone when he brought that to you?
Yes.
Where were you when you received that knife?
I was in my office at the coroner's office.
Did he give you a chance to examine the knife?
Briefly.
Did you ask him, did you tell him you might have needed, did you need more time than he gave you to examine?
For an accurate scientific examination, yes.
Did you tell him that?
No.
Why not?
I didn't think it was indicated.
Wait, a detective who's in charge of a homicide comes in with a knife, and he tells you this may be similar to the murder weapon. Is that correct?
Yes.
He asks you to check to see, and you're telling us that you didn't think it was indicated for you to perform a proper evaluation?
Well, I said it could be the weapon that caused some of the wounds, including the cutting wounds. It was a single edge. It had a single sharp cutting edge, and it's obviously consistent with many of the slashing wounds. And it was a 6-inch blade. And at the time, we didn't think it indicated, or I didn't think it indicated to go through each wound by wound, just to try to exclude that weapon. That can be done at some other time.
You understand a man is sitting in jail faced with charges of double homicide, do you not?
Yes.
Well, when could that be done to protect his rights?
Objection on our argument.
Sustained.
When would you suggest doing that to protect his rights?
Same objection.
Sustained is the form of the question.
When would you suggest doing these tests?
Now?
I have nothing further.
Mr. Hodgman?
If I may, just a moment. Dr. Golden, with regard to your testimony today regarding time of death, these are estimations, are they not?
Yes?
These are approximations, are they not?
Yes?
And there is not a way, even based upon the criteria articulated in court this afternoon, for you to pinpoint a time of death. Is that correct?
Yes?
The best you can do is give us a range of time in which time of death might have occurred. Is that correct?
Yes?
And that is an approximation at best, is it not?
Yes?
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Mr. Shapiro, anything further? Thank you, doctor. You may step down. Please do not discuss your testimony with anyone but the attorneys involved.
10 more minutes in this video, and then we get to the last part of the preliminary hearing. I wonder if they'll find probable cause.
At this time, Your Honor, the people would ask that all of the exhibits marked, with exception of people, the originally marked peoples 4 and 5, be admitted into evidence.
All right, that would be exhibits number 1 through 33, with the exception of peoples 4 and 5. Mr. Shapiro, do you have any objection to the receipt of those exhibits?
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. Ullman. Peoples 1 through 33, with the exception of 4 and 5, are received in evidence at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people rest.
Will there be any affirmative defense or other evidence offered by the defense?
Yeah, but you're really smart.
There's no evidence to support the stipulation proffered. There will be no stipulation.
All right, did you wish to offer any of your exhibits that had been offered in connection with the motion to suppress?
Yes, we do, Your Honor.
All right. That would be defense A, B, C, D. The court did not allow E, G, or H. So are you seeking to offer only A, B, C, D, and F at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
Those items are received from the defense. Do you have any motions at this time?
Before we begin considering an affirmative defense, there would be a motion to dismiss the case.
I'm sorry, you say before you begin considering
Yes,
affirmative
I think at this
defense?
point in time, we would like to make a motion to have this case dismissed.
That motion is denied. Did you wish to present an affirmative defense?
Yes, I have a motion to dismiss this case. I think we should just dismiss it.
Yes.
Suggested 5-minute recess to confer with counsel.
All right.
Is once again in session.
All right, we're once again on the record in the case of People versus Simpson. The defendant is present with counsel. People are represented. Mr. Shapiro.
I have decided not to present any affirmative evidence at this time.
All right. Do you have any other motions that you wish to make at this time or be heard with regard to any motions?
Yes, Your Honor, I would like to be heard on the motion to dismiss.
I'll hear you at this time.
Thank you. Would you like me to go to the podium or stand here?
I think the podium is probably better.
Yeah, because we need the microphone. I want to know why you think it should be dismissed.
Your Honor, I would ask the court to consider the jury instruction that would be given in a case like this regarding circumstantial evidence. And that is, if the evidence presented relies solely on circumstantial evidence, there can be no conviction unless the circumstances point to guilt and are not
This is live.
reconcilable with any other reasonable
Live
theory.
from LA.
If, on the other hand, the circumstances may point to guilt or may point to innocence, the jury or finder of fact must adopt that theory which points to innocence and reject that which points to guilt. Now, clearly, this is not a trial, and clearly, the burden is not the same. But the legal principle remains. This is a case based entirely on circumstantial evidence. And it is clear from the presentation of the people and through our cross-examination that the circumstances can point both towards a suspicion of guilt and also towards a theory of innocence. The key piece of evidence that the people are relying on is the serology of a 99% chance that 4 blood drops found at the Bundy crime scene were of the same type and chemical composition of that of Mr. O.J. Simpson.
Objection, that's a misstatement of the evidence.
This is argument, Ms. Clark. You can be heard in response. At the
It
appropriate time.
really is a
The
misstatement.
converse of that is that if you take the Coliseum on any given Sunday, 40,000 to 80,000 people will have that same blood type. Number 2, there was testimony elicited from the people's witness that Mr. Simpson has joint custody of these children with his ex-wife, the decedent, Nicole. That being the case, it is reasonable to assume that he would visit the children or pick them up at her condominium on a regular basis. Since the criminalist cannot fix the age of the blood spots, there is an equally reasonable theory that those blood spots, if in fact they belong to Mr. Simpson, were placed there at some other time than at the time of death.
That's true too.
And in fact, the criminalist testified that by viewing the photographs, the blood appeared to be of different ages. However, he blamed that on poor photography. But on cross-examination, he admitted that proper crime scene photography requires using the same type of equipment with the same lighting conditions from the same angle. Point number 2 that the prosecution relies on. There is a matching glove found in the debris behind the Simpson residence that matches a glove found at the crime scene.
I was thinking the same thing earlier.
Another
She goes with you?
Well, let's go by the testimony. I asked Deputy Van Adder, how did that glove get there? He said, someone brought it there. Let's look at the other circumstantial evidence involved. If, in fact, the killer lived at the Simpson residence, the court would have to believe the following: that in a window period of less than an hour, the killer was able to leave the crime scene that has been described with a victim with 2 arteries in the neck cut, 2 jugular veins cut, and massive blood from both victims. A clear inference would be that the murderer was indeed covered with blood. The murderer would then have to do the following: abandon the bloody clothing because they have not been found or presented, abandon the murder weapon because that has not been found or discovered, abandon bloody shoes because they have not been found or discovered, and then go back to his house and leave a bloody glove in his backyard. That just doesn't stand up to logic.
Or he made it to his house while he was bloody and dropped the glove and then went and got rid of his bloody clothes and bloody shoes.
We have no evidence whatsoever in this record that whoever committed this horrendous act acted with premeditation and deliberation, as is charged in the complaint filed by the district attorney. This is a case that the police admit is still under investigation, where other suspects are being sought, where the medical examiner admits that 2 weapons could have been used. a clear inference that there may be more than one killer. I don't want to go through each and every area of impeachment with the witnesses, but I think it is very, very clear that everybody who has participated in this investigation has not done so in a professional manner. From the time the Los Angeles Police Department arrived on the crime scene, it was nearly 10 hours later until they started the scientific investigation and even took the temperature of the body. There was testimony that the fire department obviously was there and left and didn't do anything, yet the coroner's records clearly indicate that the fire department chief was the person who pronounced the bodies dead. I doubt if he did that from a distance. This is a case that everybody has jumped to an immediate and unrealistic conclusion.
Present with counsel, people are represented. Mr. Shapiro.
Yes, Your Honor. I have decided not to present any affirmative evidence at this time.
All right. Do you have any other motions that you wish to make at this time or be heard with regard to any motions?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to be heard on motion to dismiss.
I'll hear you at this time.
Thank you. Would you like me to go to the podium, Mr. Chair?
I think the podium is probably better.
Okay, so not a 20-minute video. We got to hear the crappy audio for most of it. And now we go to the uncrappy audio for the rest. I'm going to start it right here. This is where I'm starting it. I'm not going to search. This is it.
Was the person who pronounced the bodies dead. I doubt if he did that from a distance. This is a case that everybody has jumped to an immediate and unrealistic conclusion as to the state of this evidence. This is a case that is not ready yet to come to court. This is a case where the chief serologist said we use serology as much to eliminate as to implicate, and yet we have no DNA testing back. This is a case that is needless and groundless and does not warrant any further consideration at this point in time. The court, on viewing all of the evidence that has been presented from the witness stand, should have little difficulty in deciding that this certainly is not a case of any premeditated murder by anyone, for there is totally no evidence on that issue whatsoever. And number two, that there is not and cannot be at this point in time a strong suspicion that Mr. Simpson is guilty of anything. Therefore, Your Honor, it is incumbent upon you to exercise your duties under the law and dismiss this case.
Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. In order to find in this case, Your Honor, that there is no strong suspicion to believe the defendant has committed the crimes that he is charged with, you would have to ignore all of the evidence. And the evidence is consistent and very powerful, even at this early stage of the case, to indicate that the defendant has indeed committed every crime that he is charged with. As I'm sure this court is aware, there need be no finding with respect to the degree of the murders charged at this time. I will address the issue of the sufficiency of the evidence to prove premeditation, however, if the court desires. But I will leave that for now unless and until the court asks me to address that issue, because I do think the evidence is clearly sufficient to show that these crimes were premeditated murders. With respect to the issue of circumstantial evidence, as usual, as is typical, counsel picks one part away and says that's not enough, and takes another part away and says that's not enough. And of course, if you pick apart any case, any one bit singly may not be enough to prove the entire case, nor should it be, because circumstantial evidence, being one of the stronger ways to prove guilt, requires a number of pieces of evidence to amount to proof that will prove the defendant committed the crimes charged. This case is no exception. Rather than relying on the testimony of an eyewitness who may be mistaken, who may be under stress, seeing a defendant flee from a scene perhaps with poor lighting, never having seen that person before, and glimpsing them for a split second, that's direct evidence. But as the court knows, a fingerprint is circumstantial evidence. A circumstantial evidence in that way is very, very reliable and is much stronger because it does rely on many factors for its proof rather than one single one. This is a physical evidence case, and the physical evidence and the inferences to be drawn therefrom are powerful. First of all, the killer in this case was clearly injured during the commission of these murders. He left a trail of blood leading away from the victims to the rear of the residence and out to the alley. A trail of blood was found from the defendant's Ford Bronco leading up the driveway to his front door. And I would remind the court that the distance between the two locations is a mere 2 miles approximately. Certainly not enough time for whatever injury was sustained at the time of the attack to have healed sufficiently so that he would not bleed, unless he was holding something in his hands that would stop the blood. Now, the fact that we failed to find the bloody shoes that clearly were worn from the scene, although we did find a bloody glove, is hardly illogical at all. The reason we found a bloody glove was simply accident, the defendant's misfortune. It was clearly his intent. At the time the thumps were heard by Cato, he was back there trying to hide things or look for a place to secrete them and dropped the glove inadvertently. Had he known he dropped the glove, obviously we would never have found that either. But that was not the case. He did drop the glove, not intentionally, but by accident. Secondly, the bloody glove that was found at the crime scene is left-handed. That's a very important fact. The bloody shoe prints leaving that crime scene, with blood drops alongside them, were to the left of those shoe prints. That shows us that the killer was injured somewhere on his left side. The blood on the driver's door handle of the Ford Bronco would logically be opened with the left hand. And it's no coincidence that we just happened to find the blood spot.
Never. That's how often I open my car door with my left hand. Never.
On the driver's door handle. And now I know that the testimony to this time, Your Honor, has indicated that it was positive as an indication of blood, but not tested to be human or animal. But the last time I checked, dogs don't drive cars, and at least not Ford Broncos, and I think we can draw a reasonable inference that it was a human who left the blood on the door handle of a car. And those reasonable inferences are precisely what the court is required to draw from all of the evidence, the reasonable inferences. Now, on the day that the defendant returned from Chicago, Detective Van Adder makes the observation that after having seen the left-handed bloody glove left at the crime scene that clearly came off during the struggle, which is what allowed him to get the cut that left the blood drops to the left of the footprints and left us the blood drops on the driver's handle door, he sees the defendant with a bandage around his middle left finger. And then he takes him down to Parker Center, where he sees again that he has, and we've shown the picture to the court, a swollen finger on the left hand with a cut that was dressed and treated at Parker Center. No coincidence. Third, the right-handed mate to that glove is found on the defendant's property at, I think it was mere hours after the crimes were committed, in a dark, narrow area, obviously where there was some clandestine activity designed to hide evidence, during which time it was inadvertently dropped. And that discovery was made after Cato Kalin indicated he heard the 3 thumps against the wall. Someone fell against that wall, and that someone was the defendant. And in that process, lost the right-handed glove. And a presumptive test on that glove for blood came up positive. Fourth, the defendant clearly lied to the limousine driver, Alan Park. When Alan Park drove down to the Rockingham gate at about 10:40, the Ford Bronco was not there. Between 10:40 and 10:55, he rang the intercom repeatedly, and he received no answer. It was only when 15 minutes later, after Park had just seen a black person 6 feet, 200 pounds, walk quickly up the drive and into the front door, that the intercom was finally answered by the defendant. Before that person, 6 feet, 200 pounds, entered the house through a front door that Cato said was kept locked, all downstairs lights were off. Immediately after that person entered the house, all the lights went on. And 30 seconds later, the defendant answered the intercom where previously he had failed to do so. Now, it must be obvious to everyone at this point that the person seen entering the house by Alan Park was the defendant. But he lied to the limousine driver, and it's a very significant lie. Because why would he need to do that? Why not just say, I was out getting some last-minute things, I had to go shopping, I had to go to the store, I had to go get something from the 7-Eleven. He could have said anything. But it's very significant that he chose to lie to the limo driver at all, and the lie he chose to tell. What lie did he tell? He said, oh, I overslept. I just got out of the shower. We know that's not true. He was seen just going into the house 30 seconds before. The only reason to tell such a lie is that the defendant is trying to set up an alibi for the time when he knows the murders occurred. A very significant piece of evidence. Fifth, the blood drop on the trail leading away from the victims at 875 South Bundy. Testing revealed that only 43% of the population could have been the source of that blood drop.
Is that 43% or 0.43%?
0.43%, thank you, Your Honor, 0.43. Now, what's interesting is on cross-examination, counsel attempted to elicit the possibility that that stain might reflect that two people left that blood drop on the trail. If that's true, we do know this. At least one of them had all of the markers that can be attributed to the defendant, who is within 0.43% of the population that could have left that blood drop. And of the 43% of the population that could have been the source, the 0.43% that could have been the source of that blood drop, how many had a bloody glove found on their property mere hours after the murders occurred? A bloody glove that matched the bloody glove found at the crime scene, at the feet of one of the victims. That must considerably narrow down that figure. And so it's not just 99.57% of the population that is excluded, but virtually everyone but the defendant, when all of the evidence is taken into account, Your Honor. And in light of all of the evidence that we have presented, the people have more than established and carried their burden with respect to this preliminary hearing, and I submit that the defendant should be held to answer for all of the charges as charged in the complaint. Thank you.
All right, at this time, the court will take a 15-minute recess. I will announce my ruling at 3 o'clock.
Have a seat.
Judge Giles's courtroom. There's a box in the way. Parkour, courtroom, parkour. The floor is lava. Yeah, let's just leave that box there, lady. Marsha's calling her Avon lady real quick to get her order in. What do you mean you're out of skin so soft? This is unacceptable.
All right, we're once again on the record in the case of People versus Simpson. The defendant is present with counsel. The people are represented. The court has carefully considered the evidence in this case and the arguments of counsel. In keeping in mind that the proof in this matter is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the court feels that there is ample evidence to establish a strong suspicion of the guilt of the accused, and therefore the motion to dismiss is denied at this time. I want to make one comment with regard to the envelope, and that is this, that envelope at this time remains sealed. That the contents of that envelope, whatever they may be, in no way played a part in the proceeding or the decision in this matter. That envelope in a sealed condition will be transferred along with the court file to the Superior Court for such further rulings as are appropriate at a future point in time. Defendant, please stand. It appearing to me from the evidence presented that the following offenses have been committed, and there is sufficient cause to believe this defendant guilty of count 1, a violation of Penal Code Section 187A, with a special allegation pursuant to Penal Code Section 12022B, in count 2, a violation of Penal Code Section 187A, with a special allegation pursuant to Penal Code Section 12022B, and also that there's sufficient evidence of the special allegation pursuant to Penal Code Section 190.2A3. The court holds that the defendant be held to answer therefore, that there be no bail allowed in this case, and that the defendant be committed to the custody of the Sheriff of Los Angeles County. Date of arraignment in the Superior Court will be July the 22nd at 8:30 in Department 100. The defendant is remanded at this time, and this court is adjourned.
July the 22nd. We don't get that. Sorry. The next time we see OJ, it's going to be January of I was about to say 2025. No, 1995. I just, I would like to just start at January 24th, 2025, but don't worry, I'm not going to wait. It would have been cool if I would have timed this a little better, but I'm not cool, so I'm just going to play it probably tomorrow, guys. All right, we are going to 32. That's what we're on. So one of us has to remember that. So I just go in and see where the red is. See how it's all red? Okay, we saw those ones before. And then I go to the first gray one, which is number 32. Whew, we made it to the trial of OJ. Ha! Thank you so much for coming out today. I know this was a long one, but we made it. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you later. I'll see you soon. All right? Bye, guys. Thank you.